Hello guys, welcome back to Audible Odyssey. So let's step into a world of immersive storytelling where gripping tales of mystery, horror and adventure come to life. Each narration is crafted to pull you into the heart of the story, creating an unforgettable audio experience. From spine-tingling horrors to timeless classics, Audible Odyssey Adventures is your gateway to thrilling journeys beyond imagination. Subscribe now, and let the stories take you to places you've never dreamed of. Audible Odyssey presents. Jeff Anderson caught himself staring at the digital clock on the wall for what must have been the 100th time that night. The red digits glowed ominously. 1:45 a.m. He'd been a security guard at Fiona Corporation for the past 3 months now. It wasn't the most glamorous job, but it meant that he didn't have to interact with many people at all, other than the guard that relieved him after his shift. He always preferred the night shift. When the shifts were being drawn up for the month, he would always put his name up for every night shift he could get. It was nice and quiet. He was essentially getting paid just for existing. The work was mind-numbing dull though. Jeff's shift at the large, sprawling office complex had been completely uneventful so far, just as it had been for the last 3 months. He let out a long sigh and leaned back in his chair, mindlessly staring at the bank of monitors before him. He didn't really like bright lights, so he preferred to sit bathed in the glow of the screens with the overhead lights off. Besides, if his supervisor ever turned up to check on him, not that he ever did, the darkness would hide anything he shouldn't be doing. Up until recently, that could have been anything from scrolling his phone to watching his favorite TV series. The silent feeds from the dozens of security cameras in the building showed empty hallways, darkened offices, and the occasional flicker of a fluorescent light. Up until recently, the inherent boredom that crept up from time to time had largely been kept at bay thanks to the internet, but much to Jeff's frustration, the company had recently enforced a strict internet restriction, cutting off his only link to the outside world during his long, lonely shifts. Misuse of company infrastructure was the corporate line. Apparently, someone in the billing department was browsing for something that they shouldn't have been. And the CEO was behind him. Someone always has to ruin it for everyone else. Days afterwards, a company-wide communication was sent out stating that the internet was restricted purely to the local intranet, and all access to external sites was blocked. To make matters worse, Jeff couldn't even use his mobile data. The security office was tucked away towards the center of the complex, surrounded by extremely thick walls lined with metal grates. By all accounts, the CEO was a bit of a nut job. Rumor has it that he was constantly worried about a massive solar flare frying all of the company electronics and computer systems, so when constructing the building, made sure that the walls were, in effect, a huge Faraday cage, blocking all electromagnetic signals. Unfortunately for him, that included mobile phone signals. With nothing else to occupy his mind, Jeff's eyes glanced around the room looking for something to do. His eyes locked on the monitors. In a split second, he decided that he may as well pass the time by reviewing the previous day's security footage. It could be his own personal TV show. Only with people sitting at their desks and working on computers. It didn't sound thrilling, but it was better than nothing. Maybe he'd caught a raccoon in the parking lot or found out about a secret office romance. Anything would be a welcome distraction at this point. So with that, Jeff pulled up the footage starting from 8 a.m. the previous morning. It was amazing just how little work got done in the first hour or so of the day. People coming into the office, having that endless small talk about what people got up to the night before, or the weather. Grabbing a coffee, or 3, before finally logging on and starting to settle down by reading emails. He couldn't think of anything worse than small talk. With a sharp huff through his nostrils, he fast-forwarded through the mundane scenes of fine employees going about their day. His eyes darted around the screen, looking for anything extraordinary or of note. Hours blurred by in a matter of seconds. But then, something peculiar caught his eye. Jeff pressed pause immediately, and proceeded to rewind the footage for a few minutes. He then played it at a normal speed. There, in the corner of the fourth-floor lobby, stood a figure. The camera angle was too distant to make out any fine details, but the person was unnervingly still. He paused the footage now and again to try and see whether they were holding a phone or talking hands-free. Nothing. From what he could see, the person was simply standing motionless. Not moving a muscle, not even moving their mouth. Jeff squinted at the screen. The figure remained still for about 5 minutes before disappearing out of frame. Not walking out of the frame, mind you. Just not appear in the footage any longer. They were there in one frame, and then not in the next. Curious, Jeff noted the time, 11:47 a.m. He continued watching, with a more discerning eye now that he had spotted the figure. For several hours, he didn't see anything strange, but at 3:04 p.m., the same figure appeared again, in the exact same spot. Again, they stood there, eerily still, for several minutes before vanishing into thin air. What made the occurrence even stranger was that no one was acknowledging the figure on the footage. People were walking directly past him. One looking in his direction at all. And the figure wasn't acknowledging the people either. Its head was tilted downwards, almost as if it was staring at the floor. He checked the rest of the day's footage until around 8 p.m. when he started his shift, and nothing. Just those 2 brief periods of time, in that exact spot. Jeff looked up at the monitor on the right that contained the live feed of the fourth-floor lobby, in trepidation. To his relief, the lobby was empty. Jeff rewound further, scanning through the previous day's footage as well. The pattern was consistent. The figure always appeared at 11:47 a.m. and 3:04 p.m., standing in the same location, never moving. Throughout the rest of his shift, he kept a watchful eye on the live feed monitors, scanning for any sign of the figure or anything untoward. Nothing happened, and the rest of the shift passed uneventfully until he was relieved by his colleague at 6 a.m. However, as much as he wanted to go home and get some much-needed sleep, Jeff was determined to try and get some answers. He was sure that there would be some reasonable explanation for this. There had to be, so as the office workers began to scan their passes and enter the building. He tried to grab a couple of his colleagues that were no more than acquaintances, but at least knew each other's names, to try and prod them for information. "Hey, have you noticed anything strange on the fourth-floor lobby around noon or mid-afternoon?" he asked casually, trying to gauge their reactions. But one by one, as they sipped from their cups of coffee, they all gave him puzzled looks and shook their heads. "No, can't say I have," said Mark, one of the pencil pushers in finance. "Why do you ask?" Jeff hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. After all, they might think he was crazy. "Just some odd activity on the cameras," he said. Probably nothing. By the end of his line of questioning for his colleagues, Jeff was frustrated that he was no closer to any kind of answer. It seemed as though this apparition couldn't be seen. Either that, or he was imagining all of it. Come to think of it, he hadn't been getting much sleep lately. He put it out of his mind. And simply chalked it up to his mind playing tricks on him. After all, the human brain was capable of some weird stuff if you're deprived of enough sleep. He swiped his pass through the entrance gates, got into his pickup truck and turned on the engine. All he needed was a good sleep, and he'd be right as rain ready for his next night shift later in the day. Unfortunately, as Jeff lay in bed, he couldn't get the image of that figure out of his head. He'd gone 3 days without sleep before, and he'd never seen anything like that as long as he'd lived. He tossed and turned for hours, before finally passing out from exhaustion for a few hours. The next shift will be hell, as he had done for the past few nights. He arrived at the Fiona building later that evening, ready for his next shift. He shuffled his way to the security office, his legs feeling like lead weights. "Jesus, Jeff, you look like hell. Everything okay?" said John, the lifer who had been with Fiona for 30 years. It seemed to be a good partnership. John was approaching retirement, and didn't want the inconvenience of a night shift these days. He likely couldn't believe his luck when someone like Jeff came along. "Yeah," sighed Jeff. "Just had a bad sleep. A few coffees will perk me up." "Okay, well, give me a call if you need anything. Maybe think about taking a few days off soon. I'm sure we can cover you." John called over his shoulder as he pulled on his jacket, grabbed a donut for luck, and walked out of the door. Luckily, the security office had a coffee machine, for all the good that it did Jeff. Within an hour of starting his shift, he downed 3 of them. Black, no sugar. Pure caffeine. However, as he settled down in his chair, he found his eyelids drooping. To the soothing hum of the electronic equipment, he found himself drifting off to sleep. Suddenly, Jeff awoke with a start. He hadn't meant to doze off there, but at least he was feeling more alert now. The caffeine must have started to kick in. He glanced up at the red digits of the clock, 11:45 p.m. Wow, he'd been out for 3 hours. In a panic, he scanned around the glowing monitors looking for anything suspicious. He couldn't afford to lose this job. It was already the 3rd job he'd had this year. His eyes darted from screen to screen, each one showing the same empty hallways and silent offices that he was familiar with. A sense of relief washed over him. It seemed like he hadn't missed anything important while he was sleeping. As he sat back, however, trying to shake off the lingering cobwebs from sleep, something caught his eye on the top left monitor. It was on the 4th floor lobby feed. It was flickering, obscuring the video. He checked the system logs for any signs of system issues. Nothing reported. Great, he muttered under his breath, getting up slowly from his seat. He'd have to go and physically investigate the area. After all, as unlikely as it was, someone could have tampered with the camera. No doubt though, it was due to the shoddy equipment in this place. Costs were cut wherever they could. They'd even changed the coffee to a terrible own brand recently. As Jeff gulped down the last remnants of his drink, it was bitter and cold. Still, caffeine is caffeine. He grabbed his flashlight from the table, and made his way out of the room. Trudging through the darkened hallways, his footsteps echoed in the empty building. The building seemed so devoid of life now. The silence was almost oppressive. The faint hum of the VAC system in the background did little to break it. Jeff reached the elevator, and pressed the button for the 4th floor. The security office was on the 1st floor, and there was no way he was going to climb 3 flights of stairs. Especially considering he was dead on his feet due to a lack of sleep, his legs still felt as though they were weighing him down. As the elevator door opened, he stepped inside. The ride was unnervingly slow, and he found himself tapping his foot anxiously as the elevator ascended. After what seemed like an age, the doors slid open. He turned on his flashlight with a distinct click, and stepped out into the lobby. The lights on these floors were automatically switched off during these times, to save on electricity costs. Jeff noticed that the air was noticeably colder here, and he began to feel uneasy. Cautiously, he shone the beam of his flashlight around the room, taking particular interest in the corners of the room. Nothing, to his huge relief. He moved the light up to the position of the camera to check for any evidence of tampering. It looked absolutely fine. Maybe it was just a technical glitch. Just as he let out a sigh and was about to head back to the security office, a movement at the edge of his vision caught his eye. He turned quickly, heart beating out of his chest. Again, nothing. He stood still for a moment, straining to listen for any sound. The only noise he could hear was the distant hum of the building systems. "I feel like I'm going crazy," Jeff whispered to himself, as he performed a final sweep of the lobby with his flashlight. now convincing himself that it was just a combination of his mind playing tricks on him and a lack of sleep. He turned and walked back to the elevator. As the doors slid shut behind him, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Back in the sanctuary of the security office, Jeff took in a big breath and settled back into his chair, putting the heavy flashlight back onto the table with a large thump. Looking up at the top left monitor for the fourth-floor lobby, he could see that the feed was back to normal now. Just a glitch in the system. The rest of the night proceeded to pass uneventfully, and he found himself dozing off again in pockets. When he was relieved at the end of his shift by another younger member of the team, he shuffled out of the office without a word and made his way home. Although he felt physically and mentally exhausted, Jeff just couldn't settle down to get any restful sleep. He even tried having a few shots of whiskey, but that just ended up making him lightheaded. He was never much of a drinker. As is always the case when you have severe insomnia, he found himself obsessively worrying about how much time was left for him to get some sleep as the hours ticked by. He had another night shift coming up, and he was dreading it. He knew he should probably call in sick, but he'd only been in the job for 3 months. He had to keep a roof over his head. As Jeff reflected back over the past few days, he realized that in between brief naps and micro-sleeps, he'd probably had around 5 or 6 hours of sleep in the last 3 days. This was killing him. Upon heading out the door that evening, he could hardly see straight. There was no way he could drive in this condition. He called a cab. He only lives a 10-minute drive from the office. The last thing he needed was get into an accident. His eyelids felt heavy as he tapped his pass at the gates. It felt like he was walking into hell. He had to get some sleep after this shift, he just had to. The brief small-talk conversation with John felt like a dream. He could hardly remember any of it once John had left. Coffee. Coffee solves everything. In the space of 5 minutes, Jeff downed 3 cups. As he flopped down in his chair, he stared blankly at the glowing screens. He had to get to the bottom of this. Although it was likely a result of insomnia, he assumed he had to put his mind to rest. So, Jeff devised a plan, in his caffeine-addled state. The figure he saw in the lobby must have been an employee. Hell, it could have just been someone with a terrible hangover that was trying to compose themselves. He thought that if he reviewed the security footage of the offices, he could manually count the number of people in the building and compare it to the security pass entry logs on the computer system. If the numbers added up, that could put his mind at rest, and he could finally get some sleep. It was painstaking, but he spent the next 2.5 hours meticulously looking over the building's camera footage. He checked and double-checked his numbers. His calculations were as precise as he could manage, and he came to the same number every time. He could cross-reference every single employee in the building on that day to the security pass records. Apart from one. To his horror, as much as he struggled to come to terms with it, the calculations were always out by 1. The manual count showed one more person in the building than the entry logs. Someone, or something, was inside the office that shouldn't be there. As he held his head in his hands, stressing about how on earth he would ever manage to get any sleep ever again, he heard an electrical crackling noise cut through the silence. It was to the left of him. Carefully glancing upwards, he subconsciously knew where it would be coming from. The top left monitor. The 4th floor lobby. Looking at the time stamp, for some reason it was playing a feed from the previous night. Midnight. The footage showed Jeff stepping out of the elevator, the first signs of which was the bright beam of light coming from the opening doors. Reliving it again, it ran through him, searching the lobby, and finding nothing. Then, with a shrug of the shoulders, it showed Jeff calling the elevator and waiting for the doors to slide open, with his back to the lobby. The feed on the monitor buzzed and flickered. Just as he disappeared through the entrance to the elevator. There it was, the figure appeared in the corner of the frame. 1 second it wasn't there, and the next, there it was. Jeff's breathing began to quicken, and his eyes widened, as he watched the figure standing motionless, exactly where it had been before. Only, it seemed different this time. More defined. It seemed as though the figure was superimposed onto the screen. The rest of the feed was slightly blurry as the rest of the screens were, but the figure was crystal clear. Rather than staring at the ground like the figure he saw during the day, it was staring directly at the camera. There were 2 gaping black holes where its eyes should be. Jeff let out an audible and involuntary groan due to the fear coursing through his body. After several seconds of the figure staring into his soul, the screen flickered again violently, and the figure disappeared. Fumbling for the controls, he rewound the footage and played it again. He didn't want to, but he needed to know if he really just saw what he saw. Again, he stepped out of the elevator on the footage. Looked around, and eventually stepped back inside. He waited with bated breath for the figure to appear again. Only this time, nothing. Was he going crazy? Almost by instinct, Jeff reached in panic for the phone to call John, but he hesitated. What if it was nothing? What if it was just a trick of the light, or a glitch in the camera feed? Or more likely, what if it was a hallucination from having hardly slept in 3 days? He was certainly wide awake now due to the adrenaline flowing through his veins, but up until now he had felt like a zombie. But deep down, he knew what he saw. Something wasn't right. He took a deep breath, and dialed John's number, which was on a sticky note attached to one of the monitor screens. "John, it's Jeff. I'm sorry, but I need you to come back here. There's something weird happening on the 4th floor lobby camera." "What the, Jeff, it's almost midnight, can't this wait until morning?" John's voice was groggy and deep, clearly having been woken up. "Sorry, but it really can't. I need you to see this. I can't explain or describe it, you need to see it in person." There was a long pause before John sighed in exasperation. "Fine. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Just before John disconnected the call, he could hear him faintly complaining to his wife. This wasn't going to make him very popular, but he had to know he wasn't going crazy. He needed someone else to see this. Jeff hung up and returned his gaze to the monitor. Nothing. The figure wasn't there anymore. As he watched, he felt a strange compulsion to go and see it for himself, if it was even there, of course. He'd never seen anything in person, the figure had only appeared to him on the video feed. If he still saw nothing in person tonight, he could be sure that this must be a video glitch or a hallucination. Maybe it was the lack of sleep, maybe it was innocent curiosity, or maybe it was something else entirely. He grabbed his flashlight and, as he did the previous night, made his way to the elevator. This time, Jeff's steps felt heavier. No doubt due to sleep deprivation. Each footstep echoed ominously throughout the empty hallway. His flashlight beam danced along the walls as he pressed the button for the elevator. The low hum of the machinery seemed louder than usual. As the doors slid open with a ding, he hesitated slightly, peering cautiously into the empty car. Nothing out of the ordinary. He gingerly stepped in, not before looking quickly over his shoulder, and pressing the button for the 4th floor. He stared upwards, as the numbers lit up one by one. Finally, the elevator ground to a halt and the doors slid open. As with the previous night, the air felt colder than the other floors. The bitter chill was biting through his thin security jacket. He held the door open with one hand, and shone his flashlight out into the lobby with the other. He couldn't see anything unusual. He stepped out, his eyes scanning the large room, moving from corner to corner. The flashlight landed on the spot where he had seen the figure in the footage. Nothing. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerve. Maybe it was his imagination after all, he thought. He edged closer and closer to the spot in the corner. The air almost began to feel thick as he approached. He could almost feel static at his fingertips. He'd never felt anything like it before. Just as he planted his feet, the flashlight began to flicker in his hand. His breath became rapid as he slapped the flashlight with his hand, in strong sharp strikes. "God, please," he pleaded. It flickered once more, before finally going out completely, plunging him into darkness. In a panic, Jeff dropped the flashlight to the floor, crashing against the hard surface with a crack. He fumbled around in his jacket pocket for his phone. Any light would be better than nothing. His pocket was empty. He then realized that in his sleepless haze, he'd forgotten to pick up his phone from his bedside table at home. He swore under his breath. Jeff stood there, motionless. His feet were planted on the floor in fear. As his eyes began to slowly adjust to the extremely low level of ambient light from the elevator display, he noticed something peculiar. He could see his breath misting up in front of his face, creating faint wisps of smoke rising upwards. It was freezing cold. Then, behind him, he started to hear something. It was very faint at first, struggling to be heard over the hum of the building's ventilation systems. But it slowly grew louder and louder, a soft whispering or whimpering sound. He'd never heard anything like this before. Jeff was frozen in place. He physically found it impossible to turn around. However, just as the whispering grew louder, it stopped. "You're imagining things again, Jeff. Pull yourself together," he said to himself, his voice trembling with fear. He had to go back and meet with John. He'd be arriving soon. Perhaps they could both investigate, and John could confirm that it was just his mind playing tricks on him. He slowly turned around, and to his relief, there was nothing there. Although it was essentially pitch black, he could see the glowing number display above the elevator. It still reads 4, in a bright red similar to the clock display in the security office. Shuffling his feet, he headed towards the elevator and fumbled around to the side of it, eventually mashing the button once he found it. The elevator doors slid open with a groan, and he rushed inside the well-lit haven, frantically pressing the button for the first floor. The doors closed shut, and it was silent. Gone was the soothing hum of the building systems. All he could hear was his rapid heartbeat in his throat, and his labored breathing. However, he noticed something. It was too silent. He couldn't hear any of the elevator mechanisms moving, nor the subtle buzz of the lightning. The first floor button was lit, but the display stated that he was still on the 4th floor. "Screw this, I'll just take the stairs," he said out loud, jabbing the open door button in a frenzy. The door wouldn't budge. Jeff tried praising the steel doors apart with his fingertips, but there was absolutely no give. They were completely unyielding. Feeling panic rise in his chest, he started to hammer at the doors with his fists, yelling for help. It was completely automatic. He knew that there was no one else in the building, and John must have been at least 10 minutes away still. John. Of course, he'd called him before he left the security office. All he had to do was sit tight, and John would notice the elevator wasn't working. He hated stairs even more than Jeff did. And so, his breathing started to slow and the suffocating grasp of panic began to subside. He closed his eyes, placed his head against the doors with his hands splayed, and took some deep breaths. Then, he heard that flickering sound again. The same one he heard when he was watching the 4th floor lobby feed back into the security office. Opening his eyes, he could see that the display above the keypad was going haywire, and the numbers were lighting up at random. Jeff's eyes widened in fear. He then heard a horrendous crackling noise coming from above him. As he craned his neck upwards, the bright halogen lights above him were also flickering. All of a sudden, one of the lights went out. Then another, and another. To his terror, The rest of the lights then went out in the space of a nanosecond, sending him into complete darkness. What he hadn't realized was that the elevator had gotten freezing cold, and he started to shiver, partly due to the temperature, and partly due to the adrenaline coursing through his body right now. He was hyperventilating now, and was frozen in place. He didn't know what to do. The last thing he felt before everything went black was tendrils of ice crawling their way up his arms, and creeping around his neck. In the open space of the fourth-floor lobby outside, a blood-curdling scream filled the hallways, echoing throughout the building. When John arrived 15 minutes later, he found the security office empty. The monitors displayed the same empty hallways and darkened offices. He scanned the screens, and couldn't see anything out of the ordinary. As he glanced down, he could see 3 empty cups of coffee on the desk. No sign of Jeff's phone either. Come to think of it, he didn't see Jeff's pickup truck in the parking lot either. John had the idea to review the security footage from the last hour. He managed to see Jeff leave the security office, head up to the 4th floor, and look around. After a few minutes, he called the elevator again and stepped back inside. The feeds then flickered and went black. About 5 minutes of footage was missing from his account. Strange. He'd got the elevator up the 1st floor with no issues. Certainly no sign of Jeff. Checking the system logs, he found out that there was a brief electrical surge 15 minutes ago, knocking out the electronics. It forced the systems to perform a reboot once the power was back. This happens now and again, nothing out of the ordinary. Jesus, Jeff, you wake me up for this? John growled under his breath. The inexperienced security guard must have seen the electrics play up, and panicked, calling him. He then thought back to what he'd told Jeff a couple of days ago. They'd cover for him if he wanted a break. Admittedly, he looked like absolute hell last time he saw him. If you wanted me to cover your shift, all you needed to do was ask. None of this smoke and mirrors. He said out loud, barely being able to mask his annoyance. He must have thought he could use this as an excuse to get John to come out here and cover the rest of his shift. That's the only reasonable explanation. After all, his phone was gone and his pickup truck wasn't there. So, with a quick call to his wife to let her know that he'd be gone for a few more hours, John grabbed a cup of coffee and settled back in his chair with a huff. He'd tear Jeff a new one when he saw him next. Days passed, and John never saw Jeff. The company assumed that he must have let the stress and loneliness of the job get to him. After all, he only ever did night shifts. They had this happen occasionally. The job wasn't for everyone. They'd sent him a circ for his hours worked in the mail, and looked for a replacement. Today was that replacement's first day. The company didn't want to start him off on a night shift like they did with Jeff, in case it happened again. So they gave him a straightforward day shift, on a Friday. Fridays were always easy and stress-free. There were never that many people in the office. It got to nearly lunchtime, and his stomach started to grumble. He'd have to grab something to eat soon. The red digits on the wall clock read 11:47 a.m. As the guard scanned around the monitors, his eyes were drawn to the 4th floor lobby monitor. Standing there in the corner, motionless, was a figure. It had its head lowered, as if lost in thought. To his confusion, though, something looked familiar. The figure was wearing a ragged and torn-up security officer's uniform. So guys, the video has ended now. If you like our stories and want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to Audible Odyssey channel and do all these things, like, comment, share, and subscribe. Enjoy horror and adventure stories like this. So just subscribe to Audible Odyssey. Bye-bye.